Okay, well, hello. Today we're going to explain a little bit about narrative inquiry. We're going to be presenting this subject, Samara and me, Ceci. Sam, do you want to start?
Yes. So we organize our presentation as in the following way. First, we're going to look what is narrative inquiry in general terms. Second, we will look to the approach of this research method, how we obtain data, how we code that data, the author, some definition of authors, our conclusion, and finally the reference. So, in general terms, what is narrative inquiry? So, our definition, uh, mescling, mixing, sorry, this definition is a conducted type of research in which is documented changes, experiences, and events of individuals, participants' life to come up with a whole story that is co-constructed during and at the end of the study. This research wants to understand the chronological order of events, the context of the event, thoughts, and emotions involved in that event.
Okay, so as Sam said, Sam looked for her definition, and I also looked for another definition of narrative inquiry. And I found that narrative inquiry is a narration story. Okay, is sometimes a narrator is someone who is telling the story. Okay, he's collecting the data also. And compared to the case study, this is structured on interviews, and it's organized short and on concise questions to point what we ask about. And the narrative inquiry, it's based on listen to the story. Okay, it's like a sort of a discussion. Okay, but we listen to the person that we are interviewing, and as a result we get information about how events and entities connect to each other, and we reveal the whole story. Okay.
So the approach of this research method is qualitative. It means that it is subjective since we take into consideration the emotion, feelings, and experiences of the participant of the study. Um, it is open and flexible. It codifies the data, develops categories, topics, discovers patterns, describes phenomena. This is look for the opinions, nor it is not quantitative. There's no numbers on it, and it is according to particular context. It means that it adapts to the context to be studied, and it doesn't look for, as I said, quantitative factor, aspect, etc.
So pretty much this is a qualitative methodology based on ontological and epistemological assumptions underpinning of inquiry, and they include human leads. For example, story lives, understanding the stories we tell and the stories we hear others tell shape our lives, and it has many multiple interpretations. Okay, so based on what I looked for, the inquiry, it's based on or emphasize the standard elements of empirical research, including a rational, theoretical foundation, phenomena of interest, ethical justifiable methods, rigorous analysis, and scholarly representation of results, that this is an interpretive through a narrative lens.
So the way in which we can obtain data is not only by interviews, it is also by documents or narrative previous studies of in narrative inquiry. The results or the obtained of the data obtained can be verbal, not verbal, written text, audios, videos, photos. It can be by observation or interviews, as I say, that it is the most used to get stories of people. So mostly the obtaining data is by storytelling of people who live the event or phenomenon to be studied. So one participant might narrate several stories of a phenomenon in particular, or several people can talk about a particular event or particular experience. But we must keep in mind the focus of the study and not to for several description and etc. and to be focused on the story to be known and the emotions to be discovered and explored.
Okay, so how do we collect our data? Well, the first thing that you need to do is develop your research design to prepare your interview questions. 3, conduct a pilot study. 4, select the participants. 5, establish a rapport with the participants. 6, conduct a transcribe of the interviews. So the first one, the develop your research design, it's based on determine the research questions, the develop of rational, and also select an appropriate approach. For preparing the interviewing questions, you need to make a list of questions or an interview guide. For conduct a pilot study, this one gives you the opportunity to for researchers to test and refine their methods and procedures for collecting data and analysis. And how do we select the participants? Well, sometimes it's impossible to find participants. So the first thing that you need to do is find people who are willing to participate, or sometimes you can also select them. But sometimes it's impossible because they don't agree to do with your study. So you can find people that is willing to participate. Um, how do you establish a rapport with your participants? Well, the first thing that you need to remember is that you need to familiarize with the participants. Remember that the life history researchers stress the importance of the researchers, and the researcher should establish a relationship based on mutual respect and trust. This is how you establish a rapport with your participants. This is the way they're going to trust in you. And finally, how do we conduct and transcribe the interviews? Well, something really important that you need to remember is that you need to listen over and over again the conversations that you had with this person, and you need to you need to try to understand what the participant was trying to say, and you need to reflect on it. And also, this is going to help you to see what this person was trying to say, and also what you need to explore on the second interview. How do you organize and interpret your data? The first thing that you need to remember is the code of the interviews transcripts, and Also, you need to look for connections, okay? Try to compare and contrast pieces of data, write comments and ideas about the coded segments, and figure the participants' story.
So also we need to consider that the analysis of narratives must be in chronological order, but not as a list of events. So you need to have an order for these stories. If it is one, if it is a person, or if it is several persons, you need to look for an chronological order in order to understand these events or the emotions that you are studying. And this is a process of going back and forth. So you are going look at the story again over and over, as Ceci said. Um, one participant might narrate several stories or several people as a particular event, as I say. But remember to keep in mind always the focus to not get so much involved in the interviews. So we need to have ethical boundaries, so not that get too much emotionally involved in the study. So the data is organized by these important events or factors that we look while we are interpreting our stories or narration that we get. Um, and these categories are not defined by the subjects or the participants. Or this is participant was the story. This second participant, second story, or per question. No, that's all. The coding is looking for events, categories, or specific feelings. For example, motivation, or talking about teaching. Motivation will be an example.
Okay, so when you are coding your interviews, you can also label or give names, and you can look for connections between codes, comparing units of tests that were already coded to see if they have the same code. Um, Later, you are going to look for connections between codes and start to group codes into categories. And new codes emerge and existing codes merge to eventually become categories. After retaining data, some categories can emerge from the data analysis. Those categories are helpful and necessary to understand the narrative that is being documented. And the data is often categorized by important events or factors, not by the subjects or peer questions. Also, something important is that you need to configure the participant's story from the interview data. You need to send the story to the participants for their comments, carry out a cross-story analysis, and note themes as they emerge from the stories. Okay, so how do you present your findings? Well, for this part, it's really important that you need to prepare a report about your narrative inquiry. Okay, so this means that you need to create a story based on the interview. Remember that your participants must be aware of your investigation and let them know that during this investigation, some things can change because of the course it's taken these interviews.
Yes, also to complement the percentage your data, there's a difference in analysis of narrative that is analyzing the data. Another is the narrative analysis. The narrative analysis is when you put the all the things together to create a whole story from the researcher analysis. So it becomes a story from the researcher and it is not a story from the participants anymore. Some authors, for example, Murray in 2009, are that narrative inquiry is a study in which is documented changes in the life story of the participants, including aspects of their personal life. So be careful for getting emotionally involved. And Barkhuizen defines it as a lot of meaning making going on in narrative co-construction of stories from participant stories. So it's a whole process of co-construction between participants and researchers. So narrative inquiry in ELT can help us to explore motivation, uh, multilingualism, learning strategies, autonomous learning, self-directed learning, etc. These stories from English learning can provide us information about who the learners are and how they learn. Also, minorities and marginalized people are heard. Those are the focus that can be using ELT using narrative inquiry.
Okay, so finally we have the conclusion. Based on the conclusion of the readings, narrative inquiry is about letting the participant's voice be heard. Therefore, you will need to listen intently. This applies to the interpretation phase of study as much as it does to the data collection stage. Second, never lose sight of those the story is being told. And third, when you ask someone to tell you their story, you are asking them to open up their personal lives to strangers and to scrutiny. In order to get the whole story, you have to gain this person's trust. Okay, so here you're gonna find the reference we used for this reading. And I hope you like this presentation. And if you have any questions, you can ask to Sam or me, Ceci. And that's it. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Bye.